Hello and welcome to this training on epilepsy and the endocannabinoid system and cannabis medicines. Now we've created this lesson, this webinar, this training, compiled this information for the Intractable Epilepsy Charity. Now there is a lot of pressure on families across the UK and across the world really to find ways to manage their children, their family members' epilepsy. And there's really very few treatments out there that can reliably support epilepsy and reduce the burden of those seizures and the impact of epilepsy on the life of a patient and of an individual. And as well, information around cannabis and epilepsy can be very hard to find. And so we want to try and alleviate as much of that pressure as possible so it's easy for you to understand cannabis medicines, what's going on, and how they may potentially impact or be useful or utilized in the cases of epilepsy, and as well why the patients and other medical professionals are exploring this avenue of medical research as well. So we're going to talk about some of the science, some of the research, and some of the information that's out there that you should know that will hopefully contribute towards you making an informed decision around cannabis products and whether these are potentially the right avenue for you. So my name is Christopher Tasker. I am a medical researcher, and for the last nearly 8 years now I have been working in the cannabis industry. My focus has been looking at cannabinoids, how they work in the body, how future treatments may be potentially created from cannabis to cure a range of diseases. My particular focus was the gut, inflammation and colorectal cancer, but importantly the endocannabinoid system is fundamental to all processes in the body, and so we'll be giving you a little overview of the current state of affairs in terms of medical research, but then also the current state of affairs in terms of accessing these medicines and potentially deriving benefit from them in the right cases. So what is the endocannabinoid system when I talk about it? It is within the body of every human. It is in the body of all vertebrate creatures, and this is a cellular system that is found universally, and it basically developed in cells in biology hundreds of millions of years ago, and it's evolved over that time span, and as a result we all produce cannabinoids naturally. Now the three components that you should be aware of with regards to epilepsy in the endocannabinoid system are the receptors that receive signals within the brain, the enzymes which create those signaling compounds, those chemical compounds that cells use to communicate, and then the signals themselves, the endocannabinoids. Those are the molecules being exchanged by cells within the brain, by the neurons in the brain, to manage the homeostasis and the balance and the harmonious function of neurons within the brain and of cells across the body. The whole point of the endocannabinoid system is to manage all of the cellular communications that are taking place right throughout the body. Your body is constantly adapting and evolving and managing itself in accordance with its environment, and this whole process is called homeostasis. If you're too hot, you'll cool down. If you're too cold, you'll start to shiver and warm yourself up. Your body responds to the environmental conditions and tries to maintain the optimal function of the body, which is homeostasis, finding that stable equilibrium of all the cells in the body, making sure they're functioning optimally, hydrated, fed, and ultimately contributing to your overall health and success as a human. So in cases where the body is struggling to manage that homeostasis, that's where your cells, your bodily functions, and your health start to break down. Now in the case of epilepsy, this is where we see seizures. The inability of the body to manage the chemical signals in the brain, in the body's neurons, is what ultimately causes these cellular storms, these essentially frustrated, angry, irritated cells from triggering and causing those seizures. Now that can be presented in a number of ways in the endocannabinoid system, And we see all sorts of alterations in the enzymes, the endocannabinoids, and the receptors. Now, although this is not particularly useful for the health of an individual, if we can measure these signals, we can then hopefully create treatments that push this system back into alignment and find that homeostasis, that balance, and that function that we're looking for in the brain and in the human body. So what is epilepsy? Well, it is a dysregulation of those cellular communications. Now, in the brain, that looks like a seizure, and obviously as well, there are other areas of the body where this dysregulation can affect you, whether it be inflammation of the joints, inflammation of the gut, the development of cancers. This dysregulation is the fundamental theme amongst all of the diseases that we experience. And with regards to epilepsy, what this means is that the normal cellular signaling, the normal electrical function of those neurons is struggling and almost battling for control and to regain that homeostasis. And that's where we start to see seizures arise, and the manifestation of that biological frustration ultimately results in the symptoms that we see with epilepsy, the seizures, the struggles cognitively as a result of this dysregulation in the brain. And it's really a bit of an electrical storm in the brain. Your biology struggling to rein that in and control that and effectively communicate with the other cells and other areas of the brain as well. And so this is where the term cannabinoid medicine, endocannabinoid medicine might have come up. There are avenues now in cannabinoid medical research where we're exploring the therapeutic potential of these compounds, but also of cannabis medicines that can be used to alter and adjust the endocannabinoid system in a way that would be therapeutically advantageous, i.e. reducing seizures. So there's a couple of families of cannabinoids that you should be aware of. Most of you will have heard of phytocannabinoids, the compounds produced in the cannabis plant. These are what are packaged up into sort of tinctures and oils that you see. Some patients take them under the tongue. Some patients rub them externally to be absorbed through the skin. Of course, you can get suppositories and other inhalable versions of phytocannabinoids that can be absorbed and utilized by the body. We've also got synthetic cannabinoids, which are produced artificially by humans in the lab. Now, we can produce synthetic versions of phytocannabinoids, which mimic and pretty much use the same metabolic production processes as the cannabis plant would use to create those. And then as well, we do produce artificial versions or completely synthetic cannabinoids that would not be found in nature otherwise, which are far more potent and also potentially dangerous as well if administered in an uncontrolled environment. We then of course have the endocannabinoids that all of our bodies produce, that our cells use to manage the communications, communicate with each other, relay messages throughout the body, and coordinate our biological function as humans. Now, phytocannabinoids are typically safer than synthetic cannabinoids just because there's a greater history and documentation of their use. We understand them more so. Synthetic cannabinoids are still very experimental and come with a variety of unknown risks, as we don't really know how that affects the endocannabinoids in the body and the rest of that endocannabinoid system. So phytocannabinoids are the ones found in cannabis. There's over 100 of those phytocannabinoids. Now, we often hear just about THC and CBD, cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol. These are just two of over 1,000 compounds that are found within the cannabis plant. And so when we're talking about cannabis products, cannabis extracts, it's important to understand just which elements of the cannabis plant we're actually talking about and we're actually utilizing. A lot of the time, medicines and cannabis products contain a lot more than just THC or CBD, and they include terpenes, flavonoids, a number of other different phytocannabinoids that are found within the cannabis plant. Again, there's over 100. And so it's really important that we know what the ratios are, which exact compounds are going into the body, so that we can reliably predict what effect that's going to have in the body. Now, CBD is just one of the 1,000 cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, which all have their own unique therapeutic potential as well. And so it's important that you understand that there's a lot more in cannabis than just THC and CBD, which we hear talked about a lot of the time. And all of those compounds affect the body in slightly different ways, but they also all have their own therapeutic applications and potential as well. And so it's just that THC and CBD have been the most researched so far, and that's why we hear the most about them. But there's a whole soup of cannabinoids in cannabis and other compounds in cannabis that also have incredible potential in a whole host of diseases as well. So when we talk about cannabis products, it's important to understand that the body absorbs, digests, and manages these products in different ways. And so depending on the way that you're administering them to the body, a different proportion of those cannabinoids will be utilized or accessible to the body, and not all administration routes are equal. For example, if we are consuming products orally, typically only 6 to 12% of that is available to the body. Only 6 to 12% of that is actually absorbed into the bloodstream as well. And so quite a large portion of that is not actually being absorbed, it's just running through the body and being excreted on the other side. As well, if we're talking about vaporization versus smoking, there can be higher levels of cannabinoids in the body, but typically the combustion of THC or cannabis actually destroys a lot of the therapeutic compounds in the process of that combustion. The temperatures are incredibly high, and so a lot of that is actually destroyed or damaged in the process. As well as that, you're also consuming all of the carbon monoxide, which is of course cancerous and carcinogenic as well. And so this is why vaporization, for example, is favored amongst patients quite often. 90% of what is vaporized is absorbed by the lungs and makes it into the bloodstream. And so you're getting higher proportions of absorption from certain methods of consumption versus others. And so it's important to understand that each of these methods will affect the body in different ways. The experience will be different as well for the patient or the user. And so understanding the dosing and the requirements of the individual absorbing those compounds is essential. And so finding the best route of administration for you is what's key. And oftentimes, if you are working with epileptic patients, if there is someone that's a member of your family that's suffering from epilepsy, finding the right absorption method for them is really key, and that's going to help you determine whether or not this is a viable treatment or whether this is actually going to have any effect or not on your epilepsy and the seizures that that patient is experiencing. So some of the main drawbacks of cannabis medicines at the moment is that there's often a lot more in those medicines and in those cannabis products than we realize. Oftentimes we'll think we'll be taking a CBD oil, but it'll be full of all of the other minor cannabinoids as well that we've talked about: CBG, THCV, CBN, and a whole host of other compounds as well from that phytocannabinoid cannabis plant spectrum. And so standardizing medicines is really important, but it's also not the only way to control things. We can give everyone the same medicine, but because everyone's endocannabinoid system is unique, these medicines are going to affect each individual in a different way. And so personalized medicines are really the creme de la creme. That is the goal. That is where we're trying to progress cannabis medicines to. But unfortunately at the moment, a lot of it is quite crude, and we are essentially carpet bombing the bodies of patients with a whole host of different drug compounds. And so this is where doctors, medical professionals become wary or skeptical of cannabis medicines, because there's so much difficulty in controlling what's going on in the body when you're putting so many different compounds into the biological system. It's very hard to predict. It's very hard to know what's having what effect and whether, in fact, all of those effects are actually positive in the short term and long term as well. So let's talk a bit now about phytocannabinoids and their use in epilepsy and what the data really shows around the use of these products in patients. So first thing that's important to know is that this research is very much in its infancy. Because of prohibition, because of many of the stigmas associated with cannabis, a lot of this research has been delayed by decades and is a lot further behind than it should be. And so the studies that are out there at the moment are very early stage. There's very few of them, and so we have to be very careful when we generalize the findings of these studies. So in this study, they looked at the efficacy of phytocannabinoids in 10 patients suffering from intractable epilepsy. Now, they did see some pretty incredible reductions in the frequency of seizures in some of these patients. When we're talking about hundreds, nearly thousands of seizures a month, reducing that down by 50%, 20% is remarkable. But some of these patients saw reductions in their seizure frequency by as much as 86% once they started using phytocannabinoids to intertwine and start nudging that endocannabinoid system in these patients. The contents of these products was pretty variable and pretty unknown, but typically there was a full broad spectrum of phytocannabinoids within those compounds. Now, unfortunately, these families were having to fund these prescriptions and these medicines themselves. This, unfortunately, in the UK is only accessible via private medicine. There are just 3 patients, to my knowledge, who are having these paid for by the NHS, and that's leaving thousands of patients unable to access these medicines, due to the cost prohibitive nature of those. And so you can see that £800 a month plus, and in some cases I've heard these prices cost go up to £4,000 a month, depending on the patient, the size of the patient, the age of the patient, depending on how their body has adapted to these compounds. Everyone's going to have a different degree of susceptibility to these compounds, and as well, everyone's body's going to absorb these in different ways. Some may be more responsive than others, and that is because of their endocannabinoid systems and their other biological processes that are going to be affected by a number of factors throughout their body. It might be other medicines they're taking, and it could also be the diets that they're consuming as well. So as you can see, these are some pretty remarkable outcomes that were seen in this study conducted by Drug Science, but this is just in 10 patients, and so would the differences be greater in a 100-person study? Would it be different, smaller, greater in a study of 1,000 people? It's hard to say, and so we have to be really careful when we generalize data of this kind. But as we've seen in this snapshot here of 10 patients, an 86% seizure frequency reduction is life-changing and may even potentially be life-saving for these patients too. And so there are now a number of children that have successfully pretty much, I hate to say cured their epilepsy, but they haven't had a seizure in a very long time. And as a result, they're living happier, healthier lives now than they were previous to taking cannabinoid medicines. Now, there is a caveat to this in understanding the potential risks associated with these compounds as well. If mixed with the wrong medications, that can potentially have toxic effects on the body as well. And what we do see are a number of side effects from this mixing of medicines and from this mixing of compounds, just because of how many drugs and different medicines are interacting in the body, pushing different buttons and altering the body in different ways, sometimes conflicting ways, sometimes synergistic ways. But crucially, these things can go either way, and so there's always an element of risk to these compounds, whether we're aware of them or not. the most important thing is that we're controlling all the variables that we can and aware of all of the potential variables that are affecting the patient and the success of these medicines as well. So to talk a bit more about some of those adverse effects, a couple of studies have reviewed how these compounds may or may not positively or adversely affect humans who do take them. Unfortunately, a lot of the data that we do have is actually in animals, and early animal data has shown that cannabinoids pretty much impact every area of the body in some way, whether that be the reproductive system, the central nervous system, the liver. We do see alterations in reproductive capacity, in the size and shape and function of organs in the body, the gut, the liver, the kidneys. So these aren't fully reviewed, guaranteed treatments, cures, symptom management tools. There is a good likelihood, and there's some data showing that these are positive, but there's also so many unknowns to the long-term picture of how these compounds affect the body, how they affect the cells at a cellular level, that there is still a lot of guesswork involved and a lot of potential unknowns that you're having to navigate. In humans, where they've looked at the combination of cannabinoids or CBD with other disorders, some of those drug-to-drug interactions that I've mentioned do come about. You do get liver abnormalities. It can sometimes cause diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, fatigue as well. And so in humans who are already consuming prescription medications, we should be very careful when we're talking about using phytocannabinoids in their body and potentially mixing up a toxic soup that individually all of those compounds would be safe and understood, but once you combine all those in the body, we really don't know how those are all going to react and what the potential long-term, short-term and downstream effects of all of these compounds and interventions will be on the body. And so in conclusion, there is a lot of therapeutic efficacy for these compounds, but we still don't fully understand the body enough to understand how these compounds are affecting all of these complex elements of the body as well. And so adverse effects from cannabinoids, CBD, are potentially there, they do exist, and we can manage those as well by having an awareness of what's already being consumed, how those products are being consumed as well, and the potential interactions that cannabinoids might have with other prescription medications and interventions that are already being tested. So what's to come now? What does this mean for the future of cannabinoid medicines? Where is all of this heading? Well, endocannabinoids really seem to be the go-to answer at the moment. A lot of the cannabis conversation is pretty unclear. The industry's not got the most stringent regulations and isn't quite the most reliable yet. It's very much in its infancy. So the production of the products, the standardization of the products, the dosing, none of the typical clinical guidelines yet exist for cannabis products. Doctors can prescribe them, but in terms of medical research and science, we have very little understanding of how those cannabis products will affect the body. And so when it comes to endocannabinoids in the endocannabinoid system, there's a number of ways that you can alter your endocannabinoid system positively and negatively through lifestyle factors and through elements of health, physical wellness, diet that have similar or measurable effects on the endocannabinoid system and its function as well. And so in the future, we'll very much be able to create a tailored endocannabinoid system therapy for the specific genetic alterations or the specific genetic variances, cellular variances that occur within the brain that are causing that patient's epilepsy. We will be able to use endogenous means of affecting epilepsy without using drug plants or other external drugs. There's going to be ways that we can impact that endocannabinoid system without these external interventions. And so through elements such as dietary supplements, your body requires certain nutrients to create cannabinoids and other hormones in the first place, omega-3 being one of those. Exercise as well also increases the endocannabinoid levels within the body, within the blood too. And so there are ways that you can influence that endocannabinoid system naturally without drugs, without medicines. Another one is sleep, and as well, obviously, I don't know many epileptic patients that do drink alcohol, but alcohol, smoking, all of these different lifestyle factors can either damage or improve your endocannabinoid system, depending on whether you're helping it or hurting it with your lifestyle. So if you are still confused around cannabis medicines, whether they're something that you want to pursue or not, there is still a lot of sources of information that you can go to. Intractable.org.uk has some wonderful patient information on there. They are helping patients also pay for the costs of their prescriptions too. So if you want to contribute to that, or if you need their help, do reach out to Intractable as well. Please donate to them if you would like to support that cause. If you do want more information around the cannabis industry, the laws, what's going on in terms of products, how cannabinoids work, more about the endocannabinoid system, take a look at the Canna-Manual, which is our consumer guide that is available on Amazon. That pretty much contains everything you need to know about cannabis to keep yourself safe and also informed. We, of course, as well have the Global Cannabinoid Solutions YouTube channel, where we put as much free information on as we possibly can so that you can find just about all the answers you want. As well, we have CannabisScienceTraining.com, where we'll be putting more free tools for patients, consumers, and medical professionals as well, so that you know just where we stand with cannabis research, what we do know, what we don't know, and how to keep yourself safe in this very interesting and very dynamic cannabis industry that's emerging now across the world. And so I want to say a thank you to Intractable for all the incredible work they do. It's unfortunate that they have to do the work that they do, but it's a worthy cause, and unfortunately the laws aren't keeping up, our politicians aren't keeping up, and a lot of patients are suffering at the moment that really don't need to be. As well, if you want to ask any questions, do feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, LinkedIn, social media in some way, shape or form. I'll do my best, and we'll do our best to get you all of the information that you're looking for, point you in the right direction if all of this information isn't helping. And so I want to thank you for sitting down, taking the time to learn all of this information about epilepsy, phytocannabinoids, cannabis medicines, and wish you the best of luck if you are a patient, family that is going through this horrible ordeal at the moment. There's a lot of support out there. It is a challenge, but the information is there, and there's a lot that can be done as well. And I've seen a lot of incredible transformations as a result of these medicines too. And so do be careful who you speak to, where you go, what you pay money for. Make sure it's all legitimate. Make sure to properly scrutinize and do your due diligence before committing to some of these measures, because there are a lot of dangerous people out there essentially selling products that shouldn't be consumed by humans, and as well selling a lot of false information that probably isn't in your best interest as well. So we've tried to lay out everything here as impartially as possible, give you a lay of the land in terms of the science. We haven't talked too much about specific products, but if you do have questions about specific products as well, of course, reach out to us. So thank you very much for listening. My name's Chris Tasker. I appreciate your help and support, sharing this information, connecting with the right people. And I will see you very soon, and we'll see you in some more informational training and some more educational tools very soon. But thank you very much, and we'll see you very soon. Take care.